Now, there have been reports of several dead swans being found at Attenborough Nature Reserve in the past few weeks.
Yeah, Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust says it's likely caused by bird flu and is warning that visitors shouldn't touch any dead or sick birds that they see.
GBNews' Will Hollis joins us now. Hello. And where are you and what's going on there?
Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning. Yes, you join me live from Attenborough Nature Reserve here in Nottinghamshire, about maybe 5 or so miles outside of Nottingham City. A beautiful nature reserve that is seeing the effects, at least the initial effects, of a suspected case or cases of bird flu. You said there in the introduction, a handful of dead swans have been reported to the Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, which runs Attenborough Nature Reserve. There's been at least one case of a dead swan, while there's been at least half a dozen suspected cases of dying swans. There has been no confirmation yet from DEFRA, the Department for Rural Affairs, into whether this is avian flu, but the Wildlife Trust is suspecting that that's what they've got here. There's also been a handful of other birds that have been discovered and have been noticed by members of the public by displaying certain attributes that might be associated with the avian flu. Department for Rural Affairs has been managing this crisis that's been going on, particularly affecting farming populations, poultry. It's well into the hundreds of thousands of birds that have been called so far. But at this particular site, there's been no confirmation as to yet whether this is avian flu. But it is warning people to be a little bit careful and cautious if they are visiting.
Every year, thousands of people come to Attenborough Nature Reserve to watch the wild world. Now you're being asked to take care if you do. Recent discoveries of at least half a dozen dead and sick swans, plus other birds, makes Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust believe that avian flu has landed here.
We had reports relating to a gull, which could have been bird flu, and then we had a report of a dead swan, which has been reported as a possible case of avian flu. Then yesterday, we had a report of a larger number, possibly up to half a dozen swans. We're still looking into that report. We haven't found any further bodies.
It's not uncommon for wintering birds to arrive in Britain with avian flu, transferring it to local wildlife. However, this season, authorities are seeing a record outbreak. Where infected birds are found in captivity, like on poultry farms, the Department for Rural Affairs sets up control zones, inspects, and humanely calls the birds on site. This has happened at places in Charnwood in Leicestershire, plus East Lindsey on the Lincolnshire coastline, as well as many other sites in Britain, but most of them, at least 70, have been found in England. DEFRA also carefully watches for cases in wild birds at places like Attenborough. The suspected sickness here has been reported, but there's been no confirmation yet.
You've seen lots of the headlines, and there's been various protection zones. They all relate to the sort of the domestic rearing of birds. On the wild bird front, all the advice is that it's perfectly safe to be out and about visiting nature reserves, being in the countryside, and going about your business as normal, as long as you follow the basic advice, which is not to touch any dead birds or sick birds, because it is spread by contact, direct contact, so that you can avoid that. As an extra precaution at Attenborough, we are asking people to refrain from feeding the birds at the moment, because that does cause the birds to congregate close together and could actually help spread the disease amongst birds.
Avian flu can transfer to humans. However, the risk is low. The government says not to touch any dead or sick birds and to contact DEFRA where they're found. Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust says it is safe to continue visiting its nature reserves. Will Hollis from Attenborough in the East Midlands.
Yes, and as you saw there in the report that was just delivered, it's hundreds of thousands of birds that have been culled so far, and farms across the East Midlands, as well as different parts of the UK. It seems to be on the Lincolnshire coastline and parts of Leicestershire where there are significant outbreaks here in the East Midlands, but wherever you go in the country, there is also a bit of a problem. Now, how DEFRA handles wild birds is quite significantly different. You can't necessarily expect them to be going around different nature reserves and sites where you might find wild birds and culling them. What they do is they manage positive tests and look out for the different signs of avian flu and collect birds that they do believe have died of avian flu. What they will say is that there are different types of flu and different types of sickness and different reasons for birds to be dying. The advice here is one that they really do push, is when you do find a dead bird or a bird that you believe to be sick, not to touch it, not to try and give it any sort of aid. If it is sick, to call the RSPB or RSPCA, and if you do find a dead bird, contact the Department for Rural Affairs directly.
Okay.
Well, thanks very much. It's difficult to contain avian flu, I would have thought. I mean, because you can't contain wild birds, can you?
No, it's worrying, though. Keep your eyes peeled if you're out and about today.
But don't touch.
No, don't touch.
Absolutely.